have anything to put up there today. This is more just lecture through this, and if you have highlighters, get your highlighters out, and I'm gonna pull out some stuff and talk a little more in detail than what some of the book says on some of it. But we, I believe, on this table left off somewhere around the anterior pituitary, is that correct? Okay. The anterior pituitary is dealing with tropic hormones. Now on the lab we worked the other day, did you see that term used in that lab as a matching concept?
Yeah.
Tropic means a food hormone. And so all these hormones are feeding a process somewhere in the body. Growth hormone is feeding the process of growth. So as far as metabolism, any hormone dealing with metabolism, hormones dealing with reproduction, it comes from the anterior pituitary, is feeding the process of reproduction. So tropic means food. Now there's several of them, we're going to get to them as we mix through the reading here in just a minute, but anything from stimulating growth, development of target organs, stimulating secretion of other hormones. And they work with the hypothalamus in a lot of things. Posterior pituitary. Here's a couple of notes you need to know about posterior pituitary. It does not make any hormones of its own. It does not make any of its own. And this is a good true-false question. You know, y'all think I'm trying to trick you, but I'm telling you the answer right now. It doesn't make any of its own. It only stores two hormones made by the hypothalamus. It stores two hormones made by the hypothalamus. These two hormones are pretty significant. The first one they list is oxytocin. Well, antidiuretic, but oxytocin is listed too. Antidiuretic, or ADH, is just that. It encourages water reabsorption. It acts in the kidney. If you're dehydrated and thirsty, it's going to help conserve water. So it's antidiuretic. Oxytocin plays a role in several things. Most of it applies to childbirth or child rearing in some way. First of all, oxytocin is responsible for uterine contractions during the birthing process. Okay. After the birth of the child, oxytocin is still responsible for uterine contractions to delivery of the placenta. After we get delivery of the placenta, oxytocin is responsible for milk letdown, not milk production, that's prolactin, but milk letdown, which usually comes in 2-3 days after the birth of the child. What's the first thing the child going to get from mom? Besides a spanking. Colostrum, right? Colostrum's already there ready to go for the child, but not milk production. That colostrum lasts, well, really, the child can actually absorb the proteins in the colostrum for up to 24 to 48 hours. After that, the stomach seals up where large proteins cannot pass through it. As an adult, there's only 3 things that can pass through the stomach: aspirin, alcohol, and botulism. That's bad, isn't it? That's it for an adult. But a newborn, the stomach has more permeability for the proteins that's in the colostrum, which is their immune system now. That's the immune system. So milk letdown. What triggers the oxytocin production to give us milk letdown? Well, the obvious thing would be nursing of the child. That's extremely obvious. The things that people really don't think about until it happens to them is crying of your child. And it could be crying of somebody else's child in Walmart. You have to be prepared. Okay, so that's oxytocin. Very important hormone, plays huge roles in a variety of things there, and a lot of it dealing with labor. Moving on to the skin, next one on there, vitamin D. A little bit of sun goes a long ways. We got to have that vitamin D for absorption and utilization of calcium. The stomach has gastrin, stimulates acid secretion, which gives us protein breakdown in the stomach. Testes, testosterone, secondary sex characteristics in males. Thymus, thymopoietin, stimulates white blood cell production, and that actually is limited with age. The older you get, the less thymosin is produced. In fact, they say the thymus just kind of turns to rubber. And less white blood cell production, less defense you have against viruses. So the number one killer of all time of elderly people is the flu. And so with lack of thymazine, lack of white blood cell production, lack of protection for the flu, the older we get. So the flu vaccine was made for the elderly, although we all can take it now. But that's the purpose. And then the last one's the thyroid gland. It produces T3 and T4. Thyroxine is T4, and that actually is inactive. It doesn't become active until it enters the cell, converts to T3, which is tridithyronine, and then the target cell reacts to it. If it was active, as soon as it hits the bloodstream, it would activate everything it comes in contact to. So we only have target places for it to go. At this particular time, we have this target asking for it, so it goes to the target, converts to active T3, and we get a response. Can you imagine the chaos that would cause if it was active, everything it touches as it cruises through the bloodstream? We think we're nuts now. That will drive you nuts for sure. Look on page 314. Let's look at a little different here of categories of these different kinds of hormones. They break them in 4 categories. In my mind, there's 2. And for simplicity, 2 would be much easier. You have protein-based hormones, and you have steroid-based hormones. Now, they break the protein-based hormones up in 3 categories. You have little short protein-based ones. You have some of those that are attached with sugars, and you have longer protein-based hormones, and some of those are actually attached to sugars. So the amines, there's just a couple of amino acids involved in those. Tryptophan's one of those. Polypeptides and proteins, large polypeptides, they're the large ones. And then those attached to sugars are glycoproteins. So you have proteins and you have steroid-based. Protein-based must have a carrier to get to its target. It's got to get across the cell membrane somehow, and usually a carrier takes it across. Steroid-based hormones are quick-acting because they can readily pass through a cell membrane. What's a cell membrane made of? Lipids and fats, right? Lipids, glycoproteins, lipids. You know, so you got a combination there of steroids in the makeup of the membrane, so it passes through it. Look on 315. You have prohormones and prehormones. You may never ever see these terms again, but they make a little bit of sense. It's almost like the T3 and T4. A prehormone is in an inactive state. A prohormone is not totally built yet. If it's going to be a thyroxine, we're building it. It's not quite thyroxine yet, so it's a prohormone. Then it reaches T4 state. It's a hormone, it's just not active, so now it's a prehormone. It kind of makes sense. You don't want it activated everywhere it's at. It may cause some problems. So, moving on over to page 316. Here we have synergistic and permissive effects. I asked some test questions about these on the test, and they usually show up a little later in the semester because they show up in another chapter as well. The term synergistic, it can come, this is when 2 or more hormones work together to produce a particular result. 2 or more hormones are working together. It can come in 2 different methods, additive or complementary. Additive, making one hormone making the other stronger. Complementary is equivalent, but getting the same job done, working together. The action of epinephrine and norepinephrine on the heart is a good example of additive. One makes the other one stronger. Epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now, norepinephrine is actually a neurotransmitter, but it's listed here because it works so closely with the hormone epinephrine. The ability of the mammary glands to produce and secrete milk in lactation involves estrogen, cortisol, prolactin, and oxytocin. These are all complementary. So synergistic, complementary. You're going to want to come back to this page and study this a little bit because it gets just a tick confusing. A hormone is said to have a permissive effect on the action of a second hormone when it enhances the responsiveness of a target organ to the second hormone. Prior prior exposure of the uterus to estradiol induces the formation of receptor proteins for progesterone. So estrogen prepares the uterus to receive progesterone. Both of those play a role in maintaining pregnancy, but progesterone is the highest in maintaining the pregnancy. But what's the highest prior to ovulation? Estrogen. So it's preparing the uterus to accept progesterone in case of pregnancy. And then the easy one is antagonistic effects. Insulin and glucagon is probably the most common one used out there. We could actually pick another one out, parathyroid hormone from the parathyroid gland, and the thyroid gland produces calcitonin. Those are antagonistic on maintaining calcium levels in the bloodstream. So antagonistic or opposing. Permissive is preparing a tissue for another hormone to do something with it. Synergistic can be additive, which enhances or complementary or works together. 317, we have priming effects. Priming effects, probably you have an upregulation and downregulation. This priming effect causes the large part by upregulation of receptors. It makes maybe receptors more alert. Probably a good example of, let's take downregulation. A good example of downregulation would be you taking shots for allergies. Your allergies are already upregulated, way out of control. So you prepare the body to get used to whatever these allergens are that's causing you to sneeze, runny nose, have sinus infections. It's just miserable. And this seems to be the classic time of the year for this. And so you take allergy shots, you provide to your body small amounts of the allergens that wreak you havoc, and your body finally gets tired of seeing them and says, those not causing any problems, I'm not going to waste my time with them. And so you train your body, just like a vaccine would train your body to look, that's an upregulation, to look for this illness, to fight it off. You'd build a defense, you'd build an army. Well, the injection that we develop for allergies tells your body, these aren't causing any problems, don't worry about it. So, does it make sense? Kinda? I'm glad you could be with us today, Miss Heber. And desensitization and downregulation is the next one. They do point out things that hormones through your body are given in a pulsatile fashion. And probably one of the biggest arguments talked about, in whether it be in science or in psychology, would be, what is the master gland? Have you ever heard that concept? Yes? How many of y'all had psychology? What did they teach you in psychology? Whatever it was wrong, but go ahead and tell me.
Lots about the brain.
Yeah, I know, they come over here and borrow our brains all the time because they don't have any of their own. Seriously, they took our brain on. Mr. Rowley kept our brain on. We had a half a human brain over there, or a slice. He kept it over there for years, and in the move, we went and got it. We've got it with us now, but after he retired. What they tend to teach in psychology is one or two concepts. Depends on the author and depends on how old the book is. They're going to tell you that the anterior pituitary is the master gland, or the newest concept in psychology is the hypothalamus is the master gland. And you heard that one probably. Well, neither is correct. And it's because they're a little behind in times. They need to get caught back up. Through scientific research, there's not a gland telling all the tissues of the body what to do. The glands don't just stand up and say, you need some of this, now do it. The tissues ask for the hormones they need. And then the glands respond to the question, may I have some? And they do it. We really don't know how much they need, so we send a little bit and wait for a response. We send a little bit and wait for a response. And how we know these things is by research. For instance, their study with testosterone. They castrated an animal, and they felt like that the target for testosterone, of course, it's being made in the testes. That testosterone would be the answer to follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, which is produced by the anterior pituitary. So by removal of the testes, they saw that FSH and LH continued to climb. It climbed, climbed, climbed. And it reached a certain point, and they'd give an injection of testosterone, which would be the same response that the testes would give with testosterone, and the injection would lower those back to normal. So there's your feedback and there's your response. So as we know now, because of that research, that LH acts upon the Leydig cells of testes. Y'all kind of had a question like this in lab, didn't you? And that produces testosterone, which works with FSH to give you spermatogenesis. Now, there is some skepticism on how much FSH we need and how long do we need it. Some books are now saying that once this process kicks in at puberty, that FSH is no longer needed for spermatogenesis. The process is going and it continues to go. Don't totally understand that, but that's some of the concept that's out there now. So, what's the target for LH? The Leydig cells of the testes. What's the response the Leydig cells produce? Testosterone. So, who's telling who what to do? The testosterone's really telling them how much this is what we need. So there is no master gland, is my point. If we were somebody demanded there's a master gland, the closest thing out there would be the hypothalamus. It's got its finger in everything. It's involved in a lot of things, but it's not telling things what to do, it's responding. It's responding to the tissues. So now you know there is no master gland. The tissues request, and the glands respond. Make sense? Now, the anterior pituitary and hypothalamus work really closely together. The anterior pituitary produces tropic hormones, food hormones. LH is a food hormone. FSH is a food hormone. The hypothalamus produces inhibitory hormones that will stop production of something. If we don't need any more, we'll inhibit it, or it produces hormones that promote it. So it works with the anterior pituitary and says, yes, go ahead and send some of those hormones, or no, we don't need any more. And there's actually a communicative tract between, a nerve tract between the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus, so they know what each other's doing at all times. So the tissues are going to send their request either to the hypothalamus or to the anterior pituitary, which runs it by the other one before that any action is done. That's pretty cool, and there's a kind of a check system there. So you can see if either one of those are messed up, we're really messed up, aren't we? All right, on 320 is your T3 and T4. They talk about those on, and they tell you also on 321 that it's the T3 rather than T4 that is active within the target cells. All right, moving on over now to page 327. And we're into the pituitary hormones. We've already covered posterior pituitary. If I have a test question on the test, true, false, the posterior pituitary makes and stores two hormones. True or false? True. It is false. It does not make any hormones of its own. It only stores. It stores hormones made by, you probably remember this, hypothalamus. It stores two hormones made by the hypothalamus. All right, let's look at the pituitary hormones, and they tell you where tropic means food. The first one is growth hormone. Fortunately, a lot of these hormones do exactly what they say. This one obviously would promote growth. Now, lack of growth hormone would actually cause a dwarf. We understand that. If identified, early enough in life, we can add growth hormone to this child's life and restore growth as they go. Now, we cannot identify it at 20 years old and expect them to grow to normal height. As a small child, preferably an infant, we get growth hormone in their system and they live a normal life, okay? Now, of course, too much growth hormone in an adult causes gigantism, and I don't know which one's worse, but that'd be one big person, but as an adult, gigantism, there's a point we quit growing up. And gigantism, growth hormone causes thickening of hands, facial features, and so they have huge hands and they have a huge bones in their face, and I mean, it's really a different kind of deal. I think they'll mention that here a little bit later. Here's the questions about growth hormone. When does your body produce it? Kind of a multi-answer, borderline trick question. But I'm doing it in class and not on the test, so we can answer this baby. When does your body produce growth hormone? Give me your most obvious answer, because it's probably right. There's several right answers here. Puberty, that's when a growth spurt hits, isn't it? Are we producing growth hormone when we're little bitty? Oh, probably right on from. Would you agree? All right. So at what time of the day would your body produce growth hormone? All day? While you're sleeping. Growth hormone is produced while you're sleeping. Now, some people would answer that at night. Not everybody sleeps at night. Small babies, you try to get them, they'll take several naps a day, won't they? Or at least you hope they do, to get some relief. They're growing. If they're sleeping, they're growing. If they're sleeping, they're producing growth hormone. Now, is there any foods that we can consume that directly associated with sleepiness and growth hormone? Turkey. Yeah. Have you ever ate a Thanksgiving dinner and not want to take a nap? A big whopping turkey dinner and not want to take a nap? Tryptophan is the amino acid that makes you sleepy. You get it in turkey, in milk products. So fire up the tryptophan, make yourself sleep. Unfortunately, at our age, the time we sleep, it's growth in circumference instead of growth in height. So be careful with the tryptophan on that. But yeah, I mean, infants that are being breastfed, that's the fastest thing to put them to sleep. Get their belly full of milk. It wipes them out every time. They say warm milk will help you sleep at night. I can't really stomach warm milk. I like it really cold, but it'll still help. So tryptophan is the big kicker on growth hormone. Yes, we do hit growth spurts at puberty, so there may be times in life that there's more growth hormone produced. And you may have been that kid that went home as an 8th grader for the summer and come back as a 9th grader, and nobody knew you because you was 4 inches taller than you were. You may have been the chubby little 8th grader, and now you're slim and tall. Have you seen those kids? I mean, you may have been one of those kids. You know, we hit those years of growth spurts. Now, what happens in this time of puberty? This child, teenager, sleeps a lot. Would you agree? That's your growth spurt. When they are awake, they eat a lot and argue with the parents. That's what happens in growth spurt puberty. You act like you did that. Did you argue with your parents much?
No.
Were your parents really stupid at that point in your life?
No.
It's amazing how their intelligence fluctuates with your growth spurts. I've been stupid many times in my life, and I have several more times ahead of me. So to outsmart the children, we tell the grandparents what we need the children to know, and they pass it on because grandparents are older and wiser. I shouldn't let my secrets out, should I? I don't think your parents probably didn't try it either. Most of you just wanted to beat you to death when you didn't listen, but that was an option for me at one time. So there's growth hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone does just that. It stimulates the thyroid to produce T4, thyroxine, which travels to the target, switches to T3, becomes active, and we get metabolism in the cell. Number 3, Adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. ACTH. This is a hormone that's acting upon the adrenal cortex to produce cortisol. So this hormone will be activated during times of stress. This hormone is going to cause the adrenal cortex to produce cortisol when we're stressed. So cortisol, and it's really no different than we buy hydrocortisone cream, put on a bug bite, anti-itch, anti-inflammatory, it's a little miracle cream, you know. Well, that's what this is. Cortisol is an anti-inflammation, anti-stress hormone naturally produced by your body. So our bodies are made to deal with stress, not long-term stress. We're built to deal with short-term stress, get through it, and get back to normal. It'll also cause this glucocorticoids, it'll cause an increase in glucose in your bloodstream to give you extra energy to get through the stressful time. Now, what's your side effects here of long-term stress?
You gain weight.
Well, you know,
Did you see those commercials?
some people under long-term stress actually lose weight. So it affects people differently. But I'm talking long-term. Long-term stress, over time, your body producing more cortisol. Cortisol will lower your immune system. You'll become sick more often. And it could even, if it's long-term enough, lower your immune system to the point to allow things even as big as cancer to come into play. Because you have an immune system against cancer. If you shunt that immune system due to long-term stress, increased cortisol in the system, then you have opened up the doors for long-term illnesses. Have you ever seen somebody, they're doing fine and they go through just a huge traumatic, stressful event, and then their health goes south? I mean, if you think about it, there's always some kind of traumatic event associated with somebody's health going south, usually. Now, some people are just born sickly, and there's nothing we can do about that. But here's another thing that goes with cortisol, or here's something else that might you associate it with. Has anybody ever had poison ivy or poison oak in here? No? You need to get out more zinc.
I'm not allergic to it.
Well, and some people's not, and I think that's a good thing. My granddad could reach and pull it off a fence post and tell us kids to stay away from it and not bother him, but he could reach up and grab a wasp nest too and squish all the wasps and they would never sting him. I never understood that. But I have had my share of poison oak, poison ivy. If your body cannot deal with it, you end up going to the doctor. How do they treat it? Give it a shot. How they give you penicillin? They give you cortisol. They give you it's a steroid drug called depomedrol. And sometimes they may give you a pill pack where you start taking one and you build up to 4 or 5 and then you start 4, 3, 2, 1 back down. It's build up, build down. But I like the shot. Let's get it over with. Anybody ever had seasonal allergies where you go to the doctor and your allergies so bad and they give you a shot for seasonal allergies? That's exactly what they give you. What it does, it'll last a month or two. It lowers your immune system just enough where it doesn't spend its time fighting your allergies. And by the time your immune system comes back, whatever allergens were attacking you at that point is gone. It's seasonal. Pretty cool stuff, really. Now, they're not going to want to give you that shot more than 2 or 3 times a year at the most. If you end up having to get 2 or 3 of those shots every year for several years, they're going to send you to get tested and get you off the steroids and get you on maybe immunization shots that'll help your overall system over long periods of time. You go from cheap to very expensive deal, but it does work either way. There's adrenocorticotropic hormone. Number 4, it tells us exactly what it does. Follicle stimulating hormones, named from what it does. It stimulates follicles to develop. In males, it is obviously plays a role with testosterone to give us spermatogenesis in males. We used to have a different name for this hormone in males called interstitial cell stimulating hormone because it was affecting the Leydig cells, which at one time was called interstitial cells. So they've changed a little terminology, really have simplified it a little bit for us, because it's still FSH, same stuff. Instead of changing names and different sexes, just call it the same thing, and so they simplified it a little bit. Luteinizing hormone, this is another one that they've kind of kept it the same in both sexes. In females, LH causes ovulation. That's really its sole purpose. You'll only find it high in the female system one time in a 28-day cycle, and that is the day before she ovulates, because it is forcing the ovulation, LH. You can go to Walmart and buy ovulation kits. If you want to know exactly when you're going to ovulate, go to Walmart and buy an ovulation kit, because LH will overflow into the urine. And when it's the highest in that ovulation kit, ovulation will happen in the next 24 hours. So doctors utilize this all the time when they're trying to synchronize pregnancies or synchronize ovulation for artificial insemination or for even in vitro. They do this all the time. Of course, they can do it with a blood test too, but this is kind of a assay test where you can take it home and do it yourself. Now that's LH, and of course in males, it acts upon the Leydig cells, huge, very important to trigger testosterone. The last one is prolactin. Prolactin is for milk production. During a pregnancy, very early in the pregnancy, the breasts start developing ductwork, components of the breast necessary to produce milk. Estrogen plays a huge role in that. Progesterone plays a huge role in that. Prolactin, it really doesn't play a role in that, not in development. Prolactin is actually shunned and prevented from being produced during the pregnancy. It's only after the delivery of the placenta, when all other hormones plummet, the progesterones and the estrogens plummet, that prolactin now is allowed to be produced. That's why it's a 2 to 3 day delay after the birth of the child before milk production kicks in. I mean, 2 months before the child gets here, do you need milk production? It's kind of a waste, isn't it? So, yeah, the timing is perfect. The body takes care of that for you. It's a good thing we don't have to sit around and calculate all this up. Somebody'd say, well, we need to use the algebraic equation thus and such, and she'll just quit right there. When you say algebra, she's done, no more kids, I'm gonna kill this one before it's over because I can't do math. So the body takes care of it for us. That's what's nice. Clinical application, look on 328. This is some pretty neat stuff. Pituitary dwarfism is lack of growth hormone. It's a good test question. Inadequate growth hormone. Oversecretion of growth hormone during childhood causes gigantism. I think I said an adult a while ago, but during childhood causes gigantism, so they get huge. But as an adult, it causes acromegaly, which is increasing facial features and hands, and it gradually changes the overall appearance of this person because of thickening of the bones and even hardening of soft tissues. These people really become stiff. They have no flexibility at all because everything becomes bone. Okay? So keep those in mind. Now, pituitary dwarfism is not to be confused with cretinism. Cretinism is lack of thyroxine very early in childhood. And a cretin is not only a dwarf, but they're mentally retarded. So that's a huge difference between just dwarfism. I mean, dwarfism could be a dwarf and mentally just fine, but we can fix that with growth hormone. Cretinism is mentally retarded dwarf, and because thyroxine deals so much with growth or with metabolism, it affects both. So if we catch this child very young and give them thyroxine, when checked with a IQ test, I don't remember if it's 3 or 5 years down the road after being treated, they felt like the IQ was restored to normal. But the importance is catch them the earliest possible. We're talking hopefully before they leave the hospital, because there are telltale signs that will tell a good pediatrician is worth the money, because they'll check these things. And if they identify it and start them immediately on it, this person could live a normal life. If they miss it, you've got a cretin for the rest of your life. Because there are points, see, the nervous system starts developing very early in embryonic development, but may develop from 6 months to a year beyond the birth of the child. You still have that time frame to develop IQ. One study done in Ethiopia, where the children are malnourished, due to lack of protein in their diet, these children are identified to have 15% less brain cells than they would if they'd had proper diet growing up. Just lack of protein in their diet. So this is how huge this can be. Hypothalamic control. Well, let's see. I've covered ADH, I've covered oxytocin. So let's look at hypothalamic control. We pretty much covered this. It has its finger in everything. It's a good answer for a lot of things. Simply because it works with the limbic system, it works with the pituitary, it produces all these different hormones that promote and inhibit. They list several of them on 330. Thyrotropin releasing hormone promotes. Gonadotropin releasing hormone promotes. Prolactin inhibiting hormone inhibits prolactin, because we probably don't need it at that point. And then growth hormone releasing hormone. Think it's not important? We hadn't even got to the part where it works with the limbic system yet. Feedback control of anterior pituitary. This is where they argue the master gland thing, and they're going to tell you in here there's no such thing as a master gland. They're going to tell you it once was considered the master gland. Works off negative feedback. We know that. Pretty much everything works off negative feedback. Negative feedback would be increase, decrease, or decrease, increase, right? A handful of things, positive feedback, such as the increase of estrogen causes surge of LH, gives you ovulation. Increase, or decrease is a positive feedback. There's a few of those cases in there. And they talk about basically the same thing that I mentioned a while ago on how they discovered targets. Well, that's how they discovered negative feedback on these things as well. And that's on page 331 if you want to look through that. Evidence suggests that there may be a retrograde transport of blood from anterior pituitary to the hypothalamus. This may permit a short feedback loop in which a particular tropic hormone inhibits the secretion of its releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. Now, this feedback loop, they may or may not have a name for it. I think they mention a name a little bit later, and I don't recall it off the top of my head, but I believe there is a name mentioned for that feedback loop. But right now they're just calling it a feedback loop. Looking on over to higher brain functions and pituitary secretion. Do you think emotional states could influence hormone secretion? Well, I think our best and most prime examples would be female reproductive cycles. Would stress inhibit a monthly cycle? If it was strong enough, it would. Would extreme, let's say you go into an extreme exercise program. Curly's running 10 miles a day. That's all she lives and breathes is exercise. Do you think that's going to mess up her normal, lively activity? I think so too. And we see it with athletes. We see it with trained athletes that go and prepare for marathons, go prepare for triathlons. These females, they may not have cycled for years because your body does this. It looks at survival first and reproduction second. If survival's going well and we've got a little stored energy, then we'll start reproducing. That's what it looks like. So, yeah, and they tell you this in 332, emotional states and stress can influence menstrual cycle. These studies also show the neurons in the olfactory epithelium of the nose send information to the GnRH producing neurons of the hypothalamus. Down toward the bottom, they mention that the secretion of growth hormone is highest during sleep and decreases during wakefulness, although its secretion is also limited by the absorption of particular amino acids following a meal, like we said, tryptophan a while ago. So they're reinnervating what we're talking about there. So stress does play a role. We have circadian rhythms, day-night rhythms will play a role. If you get off your sleep cycle and you're not getting good rest, will that create stress, which will mess with normal cyclic activities? It will. We're going to quit with this fitness application here, and I believe we'll finish up the chapter pretty easy on Friday. There's some neat stuff left to talk about, though. Probably looking at our next test next Wednesday, because we'll finish this chapter Friday. Monday, we'll hit the highlights of 12, which I just have a little set of notes to go over 12 and review for Monday for the test Wednesday. But this fitness application here has test questions. So what they're talking about here is in reference to these higher brain functions on the previous page, where you have these neurons, olfactory epithelium, that's sensing things we don't even realize it's sensing. Yeah, we can smell foods and we can smell a skunk and we can, that, but we actually are detecting things with our nose that we don't really know that we're detecting. And that's what the dormitory study was about. Dormitory study went into college dorms where females were rooming together and found that if they spend enough time with each other, that their 28-day cycle starts to correlate. It could happen with mother-daughter if they spend a lot of time together. It could happen with sisters. It could happen with close friends. And unfortunately, if there's 10 girls in the same family and they're all really close, all 10 could be on the cycle at the same time, and that's when dad moves out. So the dormitory effect, what all is going on here? These females are picking up pheromones of their females that's living in the same dorm with them. We've got an enclosed area. They start cycling at the same time. So I give you quite a few options on the test, but in a way, they're sensing each other unknowingly. Now, it doesn't happen overnight, it happens over time, but the more time they spend with each other, the faster it'll happen. And they've actually seen this in a lot of animals. Most animals are outdoors. Indoors, are the pheromones more concentrated? They would be, especially in small dorms. So that's why they did the study there. So read that, that's a pretty interesting study. And when you get to that question on the test, read that question carefully, because it's one of my scenario thought up questions. And then read all the answers and ponder on those answers a little bit, because all the answers make pretty good sense. This is one of those scary questions, right? It's like, well, that one could be. Well, that one I'm pretty sure is, but this one's pretty good too. All right, so just a little heads up there. We'll finish up on Friday, and we'll be identifying everything for, y'all get study guide done over the weekend, so we can look at it Monday, and we'll have our next test Wednesday.